Now I'm currently going through this border and I'm making a few changes in it. But when I got up to Grassy Bottom, this whole border all the way down here had crocosmias. It used to be known as Montbretia to the elder generation, but it's now had a name change and it's called crocosmia. Now this particular one, I'm sure, is Lucifer or seedlings of Lucifer, because it looked beautiful when it was en masse here. Now, because I'm moving things around, I've realised that where I'm moving stuff from, it has this crocosmia in it, and I need to make a few changes and moves with it. I don't really want it there. So I just thought I'd explain now to all the newcomers or the inexperienced gardener how we go about propagating this. There's two ways of propagation. One is to simply allow the seed, which I'll show you this now. There you go, look, that's seed. So it's simply to allow that seed to ripen, which it's doing right there. So the browner section will eventually open. There we go, there's a good example of it. So it'll eventually open like that, and it'll pop its seed out and it'll just spread all over by seeding. Now, crocosmias can be very, very, what's the word really? Both promiscuous, so if you've got all the varieties of crocosmia, they can produce something wonderful. But they can also become a bit of a nuisance if you don't control them early on. So with that in mind, I'm going to just give you a few tips. So firstly, all the crocosmias that you may come across, and here we go again. As you can see, as I said earlier, this whole border was full of them, and they are at the moment. But what you should do, just to start with, just leave those seed heads if you've already got them in, because if autumn kicks in a bit quicker, or the cooler months hit a bit quicker, that goes red, that seed head. It does go red, but if it ripens before then, it'll just simply go into a brown state. But nevertheless, it looks good either way. I really like the way the seeds sit. Now, what you get on crocosmias is crocosmias are a corm. By that, I mean, in fact, this is a corm as well. It's two corms by the looks of it. No, that's a single corm. Right, so a corm is that. This horrible squidgy looking thing. But it's not, it's solid. Now, crocosmias, what they do year on year is they grow on top of one another. So here we go. So that's this year's, year before, year before, year before. And they just keep continually growing on top of themselves. And they'll continue to do that in your garden. So besides seeding around, they'll also do that. Now, should you have the need to lift, what you really need to do is just take away those those bottom corms. Maybe leave probably leave the first two. That would be okay. But anything below that really is of no use whatsoever, because it always comes off the new stuff. I've got a good example somewhere here. Here we go. Right, so that is a corm that's just developed. So that probably came from a seed. And that was probably last year's seed. Be a little seedling last year. It's done this year, not produced a flower. So that's another indicator it's probably a first year plant, because there's no flower on it. So what you must do is you need to remove those corms. The bottom layer of the corms need removing. You need to take them off. So if you've got something like that, I wouldn't bother leaving any of that. I'd just take away a lot of that corm. Or if you're not so sure, just plonk that back in the garden, put it back in the garden, and it'll grow away. And then you can make your decisions in a couple of years' time, when it will definitely have produced more corms all the way up. There's a good section here, and it's got quite a few. Let's stand it against the wall so you get a better look at that. So there you go. Quite tall, probably 4 foot that. I don't really need all those corms on the bottom of it. And I could set about removing all the lower ones. All these ones here I would remove. But to be quite honest with you, that wouldn't hurt if you wanted to plant that back. If you're inexperienced and you're not sure, just put the whole thing back in and it'll grow away again. It's only when it starts getting too clumpy that you should really consider thinning these things out. There's a massive clump there. Now they just came out. That's more likely what you'd see is this stacking system. But this sort of thing you don't usually get, where they've clumped together. And that's a sure indicator that these things are too congested and they need to be rejuvenated. So you could select one or two of the top ones, simply snap them off like that and put them back in. So there's the root. So the concave bottom there will produce more root, and then that plant will grow again. Now it's already got, it's already got a small tuber on corm on top of that as well. So that's the new one. But to be quite honest, I'd probably remove that in favour of the one below, because the one below would do it as well. So, like I say, remove those corms. These two here are really not needed. You can keep them just to stabilise it in the soil, but that's the one that's producing this year's. And on top of that, once it's matured, it'll produce another one on top of that, and so on, so forth, and it'll just carry on doing that. So, just to recap, split off some of those bottom ones. They're no good. They're unlikely to produce any viable plant. They're past the best anyway, and you want the fresher, younger stuff towards the top. So a good sign there. You can see the two top ones. Look how good and fresh they look. Look how bad they look. I'd get rid of those, keep those. Plonk them back in the garden, back in the garden, and watch them grow. Where do we plant them? It doesn't really matter. I'm on very, very heavy chalk. This is the sort of chalk I'm digging out of this border, but all of these plants are actually living in it. They're not bothered. Corms are very, very good doers, and they will put up with a lot in the garden. So just put them back in the garden. Don't put them into a wet area. Try and keep them into a more sort of moisture area. A drier area would suit, but not in a water area. They'll just simply rot. Okay, so I just thought I'd show you that, tell you what to do with them. Hopefully that'll help you along. Any newcomers got any more questions, fire away at me. Okay, talk to you on the next one. Ta-da.